Imagine you come back from, like, a totally normal vacation in Mexico, right? You catch a common parasite down there, which is, annoying, but usually nothing dramatic.
Yeah, I take some medication and basically just get over it.
Exactly. But suddenly, completely without warning, your own body starts turning against you. It attacks not just your own tissue, but also your unborn child.
Right.
And this wasn't just some theoretical possibility. This was the actual brutal reality for a woman named Alice. So today we're doing a deep dive into the genetic mechanics of gluten intolerance.
And just to be clear up front, our mission today is to completely ignore the whole trendy lifestyle aspect of going gluten-free. We are looking strictly at the hard cellular science of celiac disease.
Right, getting past the hype, we're basing this on the book Unlock Your Genes for Precision Health by Dr. Daniel Wallerstorfer.
And the story of Alice, it really struck me because it makes the genetics so tangible. It really does. Her case shows, like, incredibly vividly how genetics and environmental triggers can just violently collide. Her 8-year ordeal really did start with that trip to Mexico.
8 years, that's a marathon of suffering.
Yeah, and the parasite she caught there triggered this extremely strong systemic immune reaction. And that massive defense response from her body acted like a biological switch.
So it woke something up.
Exactly. It woke up a genetic disease that, up until that point, had just been lying completely dormant in her DNA.
So a Mexican parasite basically makes her immune system overflow, and suddenly a completely common everyday food becomes a deadly enemy. Because I read in the source material that her first pregnancy was totally normal. She had a perfectly healthy little girl.
Right.
But then what happened after that is just an absolute nightmare.
The reproductive consequences once the disease woke up were just devastating. Her next baby was actually stillborn. And over the following years, she just suffered repeated miscarriages, one after another. And her doctors were completely baffled. I mean, nobody could explain why her body was suddenly, incapable of carrying a pregnancy to term.
Until years later, she did finally have a child, but you can barely call it a normal start to life.
Yeah, her second and final child did survive the pregnancy, but he was a tiny little boy who weighed only 2 pounds at birth. That's just 1 kilogram.
That's incredibly small.
It is. And while these babies were literally starving in the womb due to malnutrition, Alice herself was physically deteriorating. I mean, she's 5 feet 9 inches tall, so about 175 centimeters, and her weight plummeted to just 110 pounds or 50 kilograms.
I mean, at that point, your internal organs are basically in danger of shutting down. But the most terrifying part of this whole thing to me is that she spent 8 full years going from doctor to doctor.
An absolute marathon of tests.
Right. And she was living in this constant paralyzing panic that she was dying from an undetected cancer. Because, her mother died of pancreatic cancer. So Alice was convinced she had the same death sentence.
The psychological toll of that is just unimaginable. But the turning point came from a totally unexpected place. It wasn't a human medical specialist who figured it out.
Wait, really? Who was it?
It was a veterinarian friend of hers.
A vet? Are you serious?
Yeah. He was listening to her symptoms, and he realized that animals actually show amazingly similar symptoms, like severe weight loss and weakness, when they eat cereals that their digestive systems can't tolerate.
That is wild. A vet solved what human doctors couldn't.
He told her to look into that parallel, so she went to her 23rd doctor.
23rd? That is insane.
I know. And this doctor finally tested her specifically for gluten intolerance or celiac disease. And when she got the diagnosis, she literally called it the best day of her life because she finally got her life back.
I mean, I would too.
Yeah.
But to understand why this was such a huge turning point, we really need to look at what grain was doing inside her. I mean, we've eaten bread and pasta for thousands of years. Why did her body decide this basic staple food was poison? What's happening on a cellular level?
Okay, so the core of the problem lies deep in our immune system, specifically with these things called APC cells.
OPC cells, got it.
That stands for antigen-presenting cells. You can think of them as these highly sensitive scouts that just constantly patrol our tissue.
Okay.
When they find a foreign virus or a bacterium, they essentially swallow it and chop it up into tiny little pieces.
So they shred the invader into, like, little pieces of evidence.
Exactly. And to show this evidence to the rest of the immune system, they need a specific molecular tool. And this is where the genetics come in. 2 specific genes, DQA1 and DQB1.
DQA1 and DQB1.
Right. These genes hold the blueprint for receptors. Think of them as tiny molecular grasping arms on the outside of the APC cells. These arms grab the chopped up bacterial fragments and hold them up high.
Like they're waving a flag.
Yeah, they're basically shouting to the rest of the immune system, hey, look what I found here.
Okay, let me try to make this an analogy so it's super clear for anyone listening. So the APC cells are like security guards patrolling a building, right?
I like that, yeah.
And those genes, DQA1 and DQB1, they dictate the exact shape of the handcuffs those guards wear on their belts. So when they catch a burglar, which is the virus, they slap the handcuffs on him and hold him up for everyone to see.
That's a great way to picture it.
So who actually responds to the guard holding up the burglar?
The T cells. They are the highly inquisitive, aggressive fighters of the immune system. Basically, your heavily armed police force waiting for the alarm. They rush over to the security guards, inspect the burglar in the handcuffs, and memorize exactly what he looks like.
And then they go on the hunt.
Exactly. They scour the tissue and completely destroy anything that looks like that enemy with full force.
Okay, so if we apply this security alarm system to a normal, healthy person who's just, eating a piece of toast for breakfast, what happens to the gluten?
Well, in a healthy person, the APC cell might still grab the gluten and break it down. But the handcuffs, those molecular grasping arms built by the normal versions of the DQA1 and DQB1 genes, they're just the wrong shape to hold onto gluten.
So the burglar just kind of slips right out of the cuffs because they don't fit.
Exactly. The arms slip off. The gluten fragment can't be held up, so there's no presentation, no alarm is triggered. The T cells stay calm, and the grain is safely digested into amino acids and absorbed as nutrients.
But for Alice and anyone else with celiac disease, there's this tiny microscopic spelling mistake in their DNA. Their blueprint for the handcuffs is different.
Right. People with celiac disease have unfavorable versions of those DQA1 and DQB1 genes, and that means their grasping arms have a shape that unfortunately fits perfectly around those gluten fragments.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they snap shut and hold on to this completely harmless food protein with an iron grip. And because they're holding it up, they incorrectly present it to the immune system.
So the security guards are basically hitting the panic button and shouting, "Enemy sighted!" even though they're just holding up a crumb of bread.
Exactly. It's a massive false alarm. The T cells rush in, look at this harmless protein, and mistakenly classify it as a deadly threat. And since gluten is naturally in the intestine when you eat it, the T cells swarm the gut to fight off this fake infection with everything they have.
Wow. When you picture that microscopic war zone in the gut, the severe symptoms Alice had suddenly make total sense. I mean, this constant T-cell attack on her own intestinal wall, that explains why she was starving to death, right? The battleground is destroying her infrastructure.
That's exactly what happens. The constant inflammation from the T cells ruins the intestinal wall. Over time, the intestine completely loses its ability to absorb calories, vitamins, and minerals.
So literally, no matter how much Alice ate, her body wasn't taking anything in.
Nothing. It explains the severe weight loss down to 110 pounds and why her fetuses were starving in the womb. The nutrients couldn't even reach the placenta.
That is just heartbreaking.
And it causes a whole host of other issues, too. Abdominal cramps, severe flatulence, awful diarrhea. In children, it leads to major growth disorders because they don't have the building blocks to grow. And the damage is so severe, it can even lead to secondary lactose intolerance.
Wait, really? So you lose the ability to digest milk, too?
Yeah, because the gut lining where those dairy-digesting enzymes live is just completely wiped out.
That leads me to something in the book that really made me stop and think.
Yeah.
We talked about Alice's terrifying fear of pancreatic cancer. And there's some historical stats in the source material about cancer risk with celiac that are just astronomical. How does a digestive issue lead to cancer?
Well, if the disease is left untreated, that chronic inflammation keeps the cells under constant toxic stress. Over years, this hostile environment alters the genetic makeup of the cells themselves. They mutate, which leads to cancer, very often in the gut or the adjacent lymph glands.
And the historical numbers on this are staggering. I mean, 50 years ago, getting this diagnosis must have been terrifying because gluten was just hiding in everything.
It was. 50 years ago, gluten was used as a cheap binder in things you wouldn't even expect. Beer, chocolate milk, flavor enhancers. There was no strict labeling.
So people were eating it constantly without knowing.
Exactly. And because of that constant hidden exposure, people with celiac disease back then had a 100-fold increased risk of developing bowel cancer.
100-fold risk. Just from picking the wrong chocolate milk, that is terrifying. How much has that risk changed today with all the awareness and gluten-free aisles in supermarkets?
It's changed dramatically, which proves how effective avoiding gluten is. By 2007, when diets improved and labeling was a bit better, the risk dropped to 9 times higher.
Okay, that's a huge drop.
And today, With widely available gluten-free diets and strict labeling, the cancer risk for someone with celiac who follows the diet is only 1.25 times that of a healthy person.
Wow, so it's almost back to a normal baseline. That's incredible.
Yeah.
But it only works if you actually know you have the disease. And that is the real tragedy here. The book mentions that it still takes an average of 11 years to get a correct diagnosis. 11 years.
Yeah, the delay is awful. The symptoms mimic so many other things: fatigue, iron deficiency, irritable bowel syndrome. Doctors often test for a dozen other things before looking for this specific genetic autoimmune response.
And that delay has a real cost.
It does. Between 10 to 30% of people are diagnosed too late, and they actually die from the long-term consequences of that inflammation.
So we have an 11-year marathon of suffering, people potentially dying, and yet there's this weird paradox I want to ask you about. It feels like everyone on the internet right now claims they have a gluten issue. If this is a purely genetic disease driven by DQA1 and DQB1, how many people actually have these broken handcuffs?
The math on the genetics is really interesting. Up to 30% of the European or Caucasian population carries at least one of these gluten-sensitive genes.
Wait, 30%? That's almost a third of the population.
Yeah.
But we don't see a third of people wasting away to 110 pounds like Alice.
Right, because having the gene is just the baseline requirement. It's not a guarantee you'll get sick. Even though up to 30% have the gene, only about 1% of the population actually suffers from celiac disease.
Okay, that's a massive difference.
Yeah, and even if you look at someone with the absolute most unfavorable constellation, meaning they have both of the bad grasping arm genes, their risk of developing celiac disease over their lifetime is still only 14%.
So just about 1 in 7.
Exactly. But here is the crucial absolute rule from the science. If you do not have these specific genes, you will never, ever develop celiac disease.
Because your immune cells physically lack the tool to grab the gluten and sound the alarm.
Precisely. It's biologically impossible.
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate for a second regarding this huge diet trend. We see tons of self-diagnoses out there. Someone gets stomach aches, they decide on a whim to cut out bread, they feel better, and they say, oh, I definitely have celiac disease. Does all this media hype obscure the actual science?
It really does. Incorrect self-diagnosis is a growing problem, and the book warns about this. A lot of people who think they have celiac disease lack the genetic requirements entirely.
But if they feel better when they stop eating bread, aren't they fixing the problem?
Not necessarily. Wheat has lots of components. You might have a mild sensitivity to something else in the grain, but by wrongly labeling yourself as celiac, you obscure your real digestive issues.
Oh, I see. You're treating the wrong disease.
Right. You could be missing a different, serious underlying condition. That's why getting a proper medical diagnosis, ideally aided by a genetic test, is absolutely crucial before you make any drastic changes to your diet.
Don't just throw away the bread basket and assume you've solved it.
Exactly. Knowing your genetic blueprint, specifically whether you carry DQA1 and DQB1, can literally spare you an 11-year marathon of mysterious symptoms and potentially deadly complications. It separates medical fact from dangerous guesswork.
That is such a powerful takeaway. And, looking at all of this leaves you with this kind of provocative thought. If a single tiny spelling mistake in your DNA can turn your body's greatest defenders into its worst enemies, how long until we aren't just managing this by avoiding bread, but actually rewriting the genetic typo itself?
That's the ultimate question in genetics right now.
Right. Like imagine a future where we just go in and fix the handcuffs on the APC cells so they never trigger that false alarm in the first place. It totally changes how you navigate the world. Definitely something to think about the next time you're reading a food label. Thanks so much for breaking down this incredible science with us today. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.